While the West Coast was busy putting flowers in their hair for the summer of love, Chicago in the 1960s was a different beast entirely. It was a city that didn't just ask for your respect, it demanded it. If the 60s were a party in California, in Chicago they felt more like a street fight, a raw industrial symphony of steel, sweat, and unyielding ambition. This was the city of big shoulders, where the skyline was being torn open by new skyscrapers and the streets were vibrating with the march of history. Living here meant you were standing at the absolute center of the American storm. It was a place of stark, beautiful contradictions. On one hand, you had the booming prosperity of the mills and the birth of modern architecture that would define the world. On the other, you were sitting on a social powder keg waiting for a spark. It wasn't the idealized, sun-drenched nostalgia of the movies. It was real, it was loud, and it was intense. If you lived through it, you know exactly what I mean. You remember the biting cold of the hawk coming off the lake, the distinct smell of money and livestock drifting from the Union stockyards, and the electric hum of the loop. We are going to take a walk back through those streets, from the rising concrete towers to the smoke-filled blues clubs, and right into the heart of the chaos that changed us forever. But before we face the fires of 1968, look up. Because while the world was falling apart, Chicago was busy building itself up. The transformation of the skyline during this decade was nothing short of a revolution. It felt like every time you looked up, another piece of the future was being bolted into place. While the rest of the country was watching the space race on television, we were building our own rockets right here on the ground, made of concrete and steel. The most striking example, of course, arrived in 1964 with the completion of Marina City. We had never seen anything like those twin corn cobs rising from the riverbank. They weren't just apartment buildings. They were a bold declaration that urban living could be modern, self-contained, and spectacular. They appeared on postcards in movies and on the cover of Wilco albums decades later, but back then they were the shiny new proof that Chicago was leaving the past behind. Do you remember the first time you drove downtown and saw those towers looming over the river? It was almost alien, wasn't it? If you or your family ever posed for a photo with those iconic circular balconies in the background, please hit that like button. It is a shared memory that instantly bonds anyone who called this city home during that era. But the ambition didn't stop at the river. Towards the end of the decade, we watched the dark cross-braced skeleton of the John Hancock Center begin its ascent. It was a black steel monster that perfectly embodied the city's personality. Rugged, imposing, and undeniably powerful. By the time it topped out, it wasn't just a skyscraper, it was an industrial marvel that commanded respect from the entire world. This drive for modernization extended far beyond the loop. In 1963, President Kennedy himself came to town to dedicate O'Hare International Airport. Almost overnight, the roar of jet engines became the new soundtrack of the city, replacing the old chug of steam trains. O'Hare quickly became the busiest airport on the planet, turning Chicago into the true crossroads of the world. We were no longer just the hog butcher to the world. We were the central hub of the jet age. However, this gleaming new coat of paint couldn't cover everything. While the city planners were obsessed with this vertical grandeur, creating a shiny facade of progress, the neighborhoods below were still gritty and real. The contrast was sharp. You could stand in the shadow of a futuristic skyscraper and still feel the raw, unpolished energy of the street. And nowhere was that energy more palpable or more profound than in the music drifting out of the South Side. Chicago wasn't just built on concrete, it was built on a rhythm that was about to change the world. While the architects were reaching for the sky, the real soul of Chicago was being forged right at street level, specifically at 2120 South Michigan Avenue. You didn't need to go to Detroit or Memphis to find the musical heartbeat of America. We had chess records right in our backyard. This was the kingdom where Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Etta James took the raw pain of the Delta and plugged it into an amplifier. It was loud, it was electric, and it was unapologetically Chicago. The sound was so potent that in 1964, a group of young British kids named the Rolling Stones traveled all the way here just to record in the same room as their idols. They knew what we knew. This was the holy ground where the blues truly grew up. As the decade wore on, the sound began to shift. The raw edge of the blues gave way to the smooth, powerful currents of soul, but the message got heavier. A local genius named Curtis Mayfield started writing songs that did more than just make you dance. They made you think. When you heard People Get Ready playing on the radio, it wasn't just a catchy tune. It was a spiritual anthem, a call to action that echoed the changing tide of the civil rights movement. The music was becoming the soundtrack for the revolution brewing in our streets, reflecting the very real struggles happening just outside the studio doors. Do you remember those nights? The smoky haze of the jazz and blues clubs on the South Side, where the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the saxophones cried out until the early morning hours? It was a vibe you couldn't find anywhere else on earth. I have to ask, were you on Team Chicago Blues with its gritty edge, or did you prefer that smooth soul sound? Please leave a comment below with the name of the one song from the 60s that screams Chicago to you. I would love to see which melodies stuck with you. But as we all know, the music of Curtis Mayfield wasn't just entertainment. It was a prophecy. The train he sang about was coming, and it was bringing a storm with it. The harmony on the radio was about to be drowned out by the noise of a city breaking apart as Chicago entered the darkest and most violent chapter of the decade. The music on the radio, powerful as it was, could not drown out the reality of what was happening in our neighborhoods. In 1966, the civil rights battle lines shifted from the Deep South right to our doorstep when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. moved into a rundown apartment on the West Side. He came to launch the Chicago Freedom Movement, intending to expose the terrible living conditions in the slums, but he was met with a ferocity that shocked him. We all remember the shame and the violence of that march in Marquette Park. When a rock struck Dr. King in the head, knocking him to one knee, the image was seared into the city's conscience. He later told reporters that in all his time in Mississippi and Alabama, he had never seen mobs as hostile and hate-filled as he saw right here in Chicago. It was a chilling revelation that proved our city was not the sanctuary it pretended to be. But if 1966 was a warning, 1968 was an explosion. When the news broke in April that Dr. King had been assassinated, the grief instantly turned into rage. The West Side didn't just riot, it burned. Whole city blocks were engulfed in flames, and the smoke was so thick it choked the skyline. The response from City Hall was swift and brutal, defining the uncompromising nature of Chicago politics. Mayor Richard J. Daley, watching his city tear itself apart, issued an order that still sends shivers down the spine of history. He gave the police the authority to shoot to kill any arsonist and shoot to maim anyone looting. It was a terrifying command that showed just how close we were to martial law, revealing the iron fist that ruled the city. Then came the summer. In August, the Democratic National Convention came to town, and with it, the eyes of the entire planet. It was supposed to be a political gathering, but it turned into a war zone. Thousands of anti-war protesters clashed with the police in Grant Park and on Michigan Avenue. It wasn't a peaceful protest. It was a melee of tear gas, billy clubs, and blood. For those of us watching from home, the scenes on our television screens were surreal. As the police pushed into the crowds, the chant rose up, deafening and defiant. The whole world is watching. The whole world is watching. And they were. We were watching our own city become the epicenter of a nation's divide. 1968 was a year that marked us all, a year that felt like a decade crammed into 12 months. I have to ask you, where were you when the news of these riots broke? Were you watching it unfold on the evening news, or could you smell the smoke from your front porch? If you believe that remembering these difficult moments is essential so that we do not repeat them, please consider sharing this video with a friend. We need to keep these conversations alive. Amidst the tear gas and the sirens, however, daily life had to go on. It was a strange, almost surreal existence where extreme violence coexisted with extreme luxury. While the streets were still cooling down, the city continued to serve up a jarring mix of poverty and glamour, proving that even in its darkest hours, Chicago remained a city of blinding contrasts. While the tear gas cleared from the streets, the city's attempt to fix the broken neighborhoods resulted in a different kind of tragedy, one built from brick and good intentions. We saw the rise of the Robert Taylor Homes, a massive public housing project that was supposed to replace the slums with modern living. Stretching for 2 miles, it was the largest project of its kind in the world, a monument to the idea that architecture could solve poverty. But we all know how that story ended. Instead of a sanctuary, it became a warehouse for the poor, isolated from the rest of the city. It quickly deteriorated into what many called hell on earth, a place rife with crime and despair. It stands as a heartbreaking reminder of the disconnect between the city planners' blueprints and the harsh reality of daily survival for thousands of Chicagoans. Yet, in true Chicago fashion, if you drove just a few miles north toward the Gold Coast, you entered a different universe entirely. While the South Side struggled, Hugh Hefner was building a hedonistic empire right in the heart of the city. The Playboy building on Michigan Avenue, with that massive bunny logo beaming into the night sky, was the beacon of a new, swinging era. It was the absolute peak of the Playboy empire, operating right here before they decamped for Los Angeles in the 70s. The contrast was dizzying. You had extreme poverty on one side of town, and the ultimate symbol of American excess and luxury on the other, both coexisting within the same city limits. Underneath both the glamour and the grit, the city's engine never stopped roaring. We were still the city of big shoulders, and we wore that title with pride. The steel mills along the lake were running at full capacity, lighting up the night sky with an orange glow that looked like a perpetual sunset. And let's not forget the smell. If the wind blew just right, you caught that unmistakable heavy scent from the Union stockyards. It was the smell of livestock and labor, the smell of the hog butcher for the world. Even though the yards were nearing their end and would close in 1971, in the 60s, they were still the visceral beating heart of our economy, reminding us that Chicago was a town built on hard, physical work. Amidst this industrial muscle, a new kind of culture was bubbling up from the suburbs, one that would change how the whole world ate. Out in Des Plaines, Ray Kroc was turning a small burger stand into a global juggernaut. McDonald's established its headquarters and really began its aggressive expansion during these years. The Golden Arches started popping up everywhere, becoming a staple of family dinners and teenage hangouts. Thinking back to those days, the 60s were really when fast food started to weave itself into our lives. Do you remember the price of a hamburger back then? It was pocket change, wasn't it? Please leave a comment below if you can still taste those original fries. Many people swear they tasted different and better back then compared to today. Living in Chicago during this time meant navigating these wild extremes every single day. It was a place that tested you, a place that demanded you pick a side. But it was this very toughness, this ability to walk through the fire and keep going, that forged the unbreakable spirit of the people who called it home. Looking back, living in Chicago during the 1960s was not a gentle experience. Unlike the sun-soaked daydreams of the West Coast, this city did not offer an escape from reality. It forced you to confront it head-on. It was a decade that acted as a forge, burning away the superficial layers to reveal the iron core of the city. The 60s left deep, painful scars on our streets through riots, segregation, and political violence, but they also bestowed upon us magnificent legacies. We emerged from those 10 years with a skyline that challenged the clouds and a musical heritage that touched the soul of the world. It was a time that proved that beauty and brutality could exist on the same block, teaching us that progress often comes with a heavy price. That enduring toughness is the true definition of the Chicago spirit. We are a city that saw its own neighborhoods turn to ash, saw its leaders fall, and witnessed its citizens clash in the streets. Yet we refused to crumble. Instead of surrendering to the chaos, Chicagoans wiped the soot from their faces, picked up their tools, and went back to work. If you lived through this era, you carry a badge of honor that isn't visible but is felt in your character. You possess a resilience that is rare, born from the knowledge that no matter how hard the wind blows or how high the flames rise, this city does not break. It stands its ground, unyielding and proud, forever the city of big shoulders. The Chicago of today has changed. Glass has replaced much of the brick, but the ghost of the 1960s still haunts the alleyways and echoes in the rumble of the L train. Thank you for walking back into the smoke and the steel with me to revisit these pivotal years. If you want to continue uncovering the raw, unfiltered history of how we lived, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell right now. You won't want to miss our next adventure because we are leaving the Midwest and heading east to the gritty, dangerous, and electrifying streets of New York City in the 1970s. Trust me, you have not seen anything yet.